Journey Together is not too far away from release. It's only a couple of weeks away. Again, it depends what time this video is coming out. And with the set is coming new cards and thus new decks. Of course, we have the re-debut, reintroduction of Trainers Pokemon. And currently in the Japanese format, they've had the set for, I think, a month, coming up to 2 months. And the Trainers Pokemon have had minuscule amount of impact on the game. Out of all the Lillie's cards, only Lillie's Clefairy EX and Lillie's Pearl are seeing play in a mismatch of different decks. It's seeing play as its own deck with stuff like Teal Mask Ogerpon, as well as seeing play in stuff like Terra Box. It's also seeing play in stuff like Dragapult, as well as pretty much any deck that can make use of Psychic Energy, and even then some decks that don't use Psychic Energy have still been playing it. In terms of the Iono's cards, they've seen a very niche amount of play with stuff like Raging Bolt, but the main way that people still play Raging Bolt is with Teal Mask Ogerpon. And then we have the Hops cards, with a couple of them seeing play with stuff like Hops Snorlax, as well as Hops Zacian seeing play alongside Duraludon. And we also have Hops Cramorant has just been seen play in multiple different decks as a very strong late game attacker. However, one trainer that has seen a decent amount of play and a decent amount of success is N with the N's cards, as these cards all go together very, very well. And N has a plethora of different Pokemon to use at his disposal, with N's Zoroark being the main Pokemon. This Pokemon has the trade ability, which lets you discard a card from your hand and draw 2 cards. It's pretty much exactly the same as the old printing it had back in the Sun and Moon era, but what's different is the attack. For 2 Darkness Energy, you can copy the attack of one of your benched N's Pokemon, which means that N's deck is pretty much reliant on all of his other Pokemon, because N's Zoroark is the main Pokemon that you're going to be using to copy all of your other Pokemon's attacks, because N uses a plethora of different types of Pokemon. He's not just relegated to one type. N does have quite a few Pokemon at his disposal, but the main ones that are seen play inside of the deck are N's Darmanitan and N's Reshiram. N's Reshiram has 2 attacks. It has Powerful Rage and Innocent Flame. Powerful Rage does 20 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. And N's Zoroark has a max amount of HP of 280, so it can have 27 damage counters, and 27 times 20 is over 500 damage, which is pretty good. And even if it's only taken something like Phantom Die from Dragapult or something like Metal Defender from Archaludon, it can still do a pretty huge amount of revenge damage and can KO anything that just hit it. Innocent Flame is 2 fire, 1 lightning and 1 colorless for 170 damage, which is like decent, I guess. It still 2-hit KOs most Pokemon in the format, if not 1-hit KOs some lower level Pokemon. But the main Pokemon that this deck has been using is N's Darmanitan. Its first attack, Backdrift, does 30 damage for each basic energy card in your opponent's discard pile. Against decks that like to discard a lot of energy or like to have energy in the discard as part of their attack, for example Celoredge EX and Goldengo, then you can do a lot of damage. But in most cases this attack isn't really going to do a whole lot unless you're later into the game, in which case it might start doing more damage. And it also says each basic energy card, so it does not count special energies. But its second attack is even more powerful. It does 90 damage, and then you discard all energy from this Pokemon, and it does 90 more damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, but you don't apply weakness or resistance for the benched Pokemon. So you discard 2 energy from your Zoroark, being 2 darkness, to do 90 damage to the active and then 90 damage to the bench. And given that the Japanese format is currently full of evolution decks, of course Dragapult is considered the deck to beat, it has a pretty decent matchup against those types of decks. Even stuff like Goldengo, stuff like Charizard and Gardevoir, it has a pretty decent matchup against. And even then, stuff like Dragapult that plays the mid-stage evolution Dracloak still only has 90 HP, so you can easily take out 2 Dracloaks with this attack, which is very powerful and can set your opponent back quite a lot. Not to mention that since N Zoroark is a dark type and you're mainly wanting to use dark energy, ability, you can play some very good Dark support Pokemon, those being Petra and EX, which allows you to switch one of your bench Dark Pokemon into the active except itself, but it does poison that Pokemon, but that allows you to use stuff like Binding Mochi to further increase your damage when you copy an attack. But even then you kinda don't need Petra and EX because N has his own stadium card, N's Castle, which makes all of your N's Pokemon 0 retreat. So N's Zoroark's 2 retreat, Darmanitan's 3 retreat cost, and N's Reshiram 2 retreat cost is now just 0. Now you may be thinking the downside of discarding energy from your N's Zoroark will add up over time, because you're going to have to attach 2 and then discard the 2 and then reattach 2 more, and we don't really have any form of Dark energy acceleration except for a couple of supporter cards that decks aren't really using at the moment, like Janine's Secret Technique, because Dark Patch is no longer legal. However, N actually has a Dark Patch of his own, being N's PP Up, which allows you to attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to a benched N's Pokemon. So while you've used the 2 energy from your Zoroark in the active, you can use N's PP Up to reattach one of those dark energies onto a benched Zoroark, so if your active one gets knocked out, you can then move into the next one. And let's not forget, N's Zoroark's trade ability is not a hard once per turn ability, meaning that if you have 3 or even 4 N's Zoroark, you can use all 4 of them in the same turn and draw 8 cards. Not to mention that you could even like discard a darkness energy to then reattach it as basically a second energy attachment for turn, so now you're ready to copy an attack. Plus the deck has also been using stuff like reversal energy, so you can just attach it to Darmanitan because it's an evolution that doesn't have a rule box. So if you're behind on prizes, you can attach it to N's Darmanitan and just discard it for the entire energy cost and just use Darmanitan's attack without having to copy it with N's Zoroark. Plus the deck can also make use of Monkey Dory because again, we play Darkness Energy. So if you've taken some damage, you can just move that 30 damage onto one of your opponent's Pokemon. That might be the difference between you hitting a knockout or just getting rid of something on your opponent's bench. After all, Badoo is a very popular card in the format and that has 30 HP, so you could just move that 30 damage onto Badoo, take a prize card, and you haven't even attacked yet, so you could possibly take even more prize cards. The only real issue with this deck is that you're playing multiple evolutions, so you're going to have to use stuff like TM Evolution, but you have multiple ways to draw through your deck. Of course, N Zoroark, just getting one N Zoroark on the field could accelerate you so much. Plus we have stuff like Arven and Iono to easily see a couple of cards and max out on stuff like Nestball and Buddy Buddy Poffin, so we can make sure we get our basics into play. The deck has also been playing like different A-specs. Some have been playing Hyper Aroma, so you can just search out, 3 N Zoroarks and now just start drawing cards. And then others have been playing some more defensive stuff, or some more aggressive stuff like Maximum Belt. It just seems to be really up in the air what this deck wants to play, but I think Hyper Aroma is probably the best option because you can search it with something like Arven, and now you can just grab out 3 N Zoroarks and start drawing through your deck. This deck reminds me a lot of previous type of decks that used to like copy attacks, stuff like Mew and Mewtwo GX tag team, which allows you to copy the attack of a tag team, not a tag team, a GX in your discard, but you still needed to use the energy or something like that. But the main thing that this deck reminds me of is Mew VMAX, which allows you to copy the attack of a Fusion Strike Pokemon and basically use its attack. However, that deck didn't really have many options. It mainly used Genesect because its attack did a lot of damage, and it also allowed you to draw cards, but some lists did use stuff like Meloetta, and at the moment N Zoroark doesn't really have a whole lot of options. You of course have your main one, which is Darmanitan, which allows you to hit benched Pokemon, and Reshiram, which allows you to do a lot of revenge damage and just has a blunt 170 if you're not up against stuff with low amounts of HP. But we're not really sure yet if these types of trainers Pokemon will get more support in future sets, because our next set is more focused on brand new trainers instead of ones that we already have. So the likelihood of these trainers Pokemon seeing more support in the future is kind of low. I imagine it's going to be certain trainers for a set, and then the next set is going to be, different trainers, and then the set after that is going to be different trainers, and there isn't going to be support for the trainers that we currently have in the game. So for N, this is probably all the support he's going to get. I could be completely wrong, and they could release more N support, but it does seem highly unlikely because it kind of takes away a selling point for the set, if you know what I mean. Because it's like the selling point of Journey Together is that it has these trainers Pokemon in it, and then the selling point of this next set is that it has these trainers Pokemon. So if you re-put the same trainers in another set, people are going to be like, kinda don't want that, because it's like we've already had N's Pokemon, we've already had Lillie's Pokemon, we've already had Iono's Pokemon, and then our next set we're getting obviously Ethan and Cynthia and Misty and Arven and all that kind of stuff. So I imagine it's going to be a one and done type of support, because these trainers Pokemon will probably only be sticking around for a year, maybe a year and a half. So there's no point giving them like one wave of support and then another wave of support. So for the time being, N Zoroark is probably just going to have to stick the way it is, unless we get some indirect support. Like for example, we have Mega Pokemon coming back. So I'm not really sure if we'll get some random Gen 5 Mega Pokemon like Mega Zoroark, Mega Darmanitan, or even just some support for Dark decks. Like for example, we have the basically power tablet for fighting type Pokemon. Like if we get something like that, could be very useful for this type of deck. Or if we just get a really good Dark Mega Pokemon, could see play inside of the deck. It heavily depends. But at the moment, this deck is a fan favorite. I would say a lot of people like N. He's a very interesting character from the game, and he's from one of everyone's favorite generations, Generation 5, and also Zoroark is just a really cool Pokemon. At the moment, however, this deck is very like low tier because it's not amazing. It is pretty strong with what it's able to do, but it's not breaking the game, because again, it's a deck that copies attacks, so you need the attacks that you're copying to be good, and we only really have two good options. There are some other Ends Pokemon that have decent-ish attacks, but Darmanitan and Reshiram are the go-tos, and all the rest of them are kind of just niche options that some lists do play, but these are the main two that you want to use. And because of that, the power level of this deck is pretty low. Yes, you can draw 8 cards a turn, but you don't really have much in terms of dealing damage. Plus again, it heavily depends on the matchup. If you're against an evolution deck, then you're going to be thriving with Darmanitan. If you're not up against an evolution deck and you're up against a big basic EX deck, then your best bet is Reshiram, and then copying Reshiram's first attack when you've taken damage to then deal more damage, and Darmanitan is there just for like random bench removal in the late game. Do I think this deck is probably going to see play? I imagine it'll see a niche amount of play. Again, it's seeing a niche amount of play in Japan at the moment. It's like a low B tier deck. Even in like the top 16 of events, it has like a 4.4% popularity, so it probably will end up seeing play. And again, if we get more end support in the future, it could be even more powerful, but I don't think we will be, just because of the fact that Pokemon wants to make the sets all about certain trainers. So maybe if we get a reprint set, they could like throw in some random little bits of support here and there, but that probably won't happen until the start of next year, maybe the end of this year. And that is it for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, what you think about Ends Zoroark and Ends deck in general. Is this something that you're looking to pick up? Do you think that this deck is a bit underrated? Do you think it will have its time to shine? Or do you think it's something that will just be like a very rogue tiered deck that players will have to be wary of, because it does have its strengths over certain matchups, but it also does obviously have its weaknesses? It does have some very good cards and very good support, but its power level is heavily determined by what it's able to copy, very much like Mew, as Mew only really used like 1 or 2 Pokemon to copy attacks, as they also had decent abilities alongside. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all of that nonsense, and I will see you in the next video, whatever that may be. Take care.